Welcome to day 2 of processing. Again, these materials were produced by Professor Jeff Nyhoff of Calvin College for the purpose of our Grand Rapids Christian High class. But if you're watching these as a short tutorial, I hope you find them interesting, and if you have any questions, feel free to look up Jeff at calvin.edu. His email there is jnyhoff@calvin.edu, or look up myself at grcs.org on the Grand Rapids Christian High page. My email would be tstapert@grcs.org. Yesterday we left off. We had created this blue rectangle. It's a fairly simple program. Remember, we're just drawing fairly basic things here. We created a canvas that was 400 by 200 pixels. We made the background red. We changed our stroke weight to make the lines a little thicker. We turned smoothing on. That's something we do fairly early on. We changed our fill color so that our rectangle wouldn't just be filled with white, and we changed our stroke color so that our pen that drew the outside of that rectangle would be white. And what we got was this red background, a blue rectangle, and a white outline of that rectangle, because we have our rectangle was situated at starting at pixel 10 columns over and 10 columns down, and ended and then went 300 columns wide from there and 150 columns for the height. And so we created this little rectangle. So today we're going to pick that up and we're going to add a few other shapes to what we've done. So if you've got the handout again, you can pull that up in front of you. But we're going to add drawing an ellipse. I should take a moment here too to say that if you ever have any questions about commands or how to do things, or you don't have these handouts readily available, you can go under the help, under reference, and you can find a whole bunch of different commands that are built into processing, but they're fairly easy to find. And if you want a triangle, a line, an arc, a point, a quadrilateral, a rectangle, an ellipse, you can click on one of these and it'll tell you exactly how to build some sort of shape. So those are all available to you. Take advantage of that. If there's something you want to be able to draw, chances are you can find an answer to that here. So let's go back to our handout. The next thing we want to do is add an ellipse. We can also use this ellipse command to draw a circle, and you'll see how in just a second. Unlike the rectangle command, it's going to follow the same sort of syntax where you give it an X and a Y and a width and a height, but instead of being that upper left hand corner, our X and our Y in our command are going to tell us where the center of the ellipse is. So let's draw an ellipse. Where do we want the center of it to be? I don't know. Let's put the center at 100, 100, and we will put the width of it at 75, 50 for the height of it. So we should have an ellipse that's centered at the pixel 100, 100, with the width, it'll be 75 and only 50 tall. And I'm just going to go ahead and click run here and then point out a couple important things. So we just created an ellipse. There it is. Right now it's going to fill it with the same color that we had the rectangle, because we didn't change our fill color. It's going to have the same stroke color because we didn't change that. It just drew us an ellipse. So if we wanted to go back into our code, maybe we want that ellipse, to the fill of it to be, so we'll change the fill color to be green. So remember again, our first number is how much red light, our second number is how much green light, and these numbers can go from 0 to 255. and then how much blue light we want to let in. So if we change the fill color there, notice this is a fairly important concept. Remember how I said programming is like a program. It follows steps. Well, the first step it did was created the size, then it made the background color, and then it changed the stroke weight, and then it turned smoothing on, and then it changed the fill color, and then it changed the stroke color, and then it drew a rectangle. And then it changed the fill color, and then it drew an ellipse. And so the last thing it did was draw the ellipse, so it put the ellipse on top. If I had put this command, let's Control X to cut it, let's put it above the rectangle, what's going to happen is it's going to draw it, but it drew the rectangle right over top of our ellipse, which is why we don't see that. So that's kind of important there. The order here makes a difference. And, you know, maybe we wanted to have, let's just add this in here, stroke 0, 0, 0. So now what it should do, it's going to change the fill color and stroke color and draw that rectangle. Then it's going to change the stroke color back to black, change the fill color to green, and then draw our ellipse. And there we go. And now you're starting to see how we could start drawing some fairly simple designs just by typing in code. I'm going to more or less skip over this triangle code. Triangle, in order to draw a triangle, you need 3 points. So you give it 3 points. You give it an X and a Y for the first point, an X and a Y for the second point, and an X and Y for the third point. And it'll draw a triangle. So I might as well draw one quickly. So let's change this. 1 point at 100, 100, another point at 75, 50, and another point at, it might help to put some spaces in here so that we can separate our points there. So we've got 100, 100, 75 over, and 50 would be about here. And then, I don't know, let's do 300. Yeah, 300 will work. 350. And now it should draw us a rectangle. Oops, a triangle. Notice I typed triangle wrong, so it didn't give us a triangle, it gave me an error code. So let's try that again. There's our triangle. So it drew us a little triangle. There's 100, 100, there's 75, 50, and 350. Now you got to be really careful. See this mistake a few times. If you had 3 points that are all in the same line, you aren't going to get a rectangle. You're going to get a line. Kind of important that you spread those out. So let's change that back to 100. There we go. Our next command that we want to look at then is this no stroke command. Right here we turned our stroke color to black. What if we had instead said no stroke? So we just, again, this is one of those commands that doesn't take any arguments, but what it'll do is it'll turn the stroke off. So we won't have something outlining our triangle. So now we draw just a green triangle with no pen around it. I'm going to comment that out. Remember how we did that? We just put a couple slashes in, and then it's going to ignore that command. We'll put our stroke color for the triangle. Stroke. There we go. Man, spelling is important. There we go. So we'll turn our stroke to black. But now let's put in a command called no fill. Again, this is another one of those commands that takes no arguments. If I push play right now, it's drawing us the exact same thing because remember, we follow a certain pattern here. So I've turned my stroke to black, I turned it to no fill, and then I turned my fill back on by giving it a fill command. So let's comment out that fill. And now I should have a triangle that has just got the outline of the triangle. And sure enough, it didn't fill anything inside there. It just left whatever was behind there behind there. So those are a couple of commands that might come in handy when you're trying to draw other shapes. The last thing I'll say, and this is in regards to, you could do it with either a rectangle or an ellipse. You can draw other familiar shapes like a square. A square is just a rectangle that has the same width and the same height. So if I change those to be the same, 150, 150, I get a nice little square. If I would prefer and have that as a circle, ellipse, there we go, I just make sure that the width and the height of my ellipse are the same, and I should have a circle. But remember, my first 2 points are the center, so I'm going to change that to 100 and 100, and now I have a circle. So it creates this nice little even circle, and we don't have to have a separate command called circle. We just make sure our width and our height are the same. This is where we're going to pause for now. From here we're going to start talking about some of the syntax and the procedures that are used within processing. Wow, my brain stopped for a second there. So at this point I would suggest saving what you've got. You can still call it blue rectangle. You could save it as something else, but save what you've got. We'll come back and we'll deal with some of the procedures that are used within processing.